We have lots to talk about in today's video, including the latest rumors around the NHL. Today's rumors focusing on a potential big trade between the New York Islanders and the St. Louis Blues. We've heard rumblings about Jordan Kyrou and Noah Dobson possibly both being available. Would they possibly fit each other's teams, and could we see a swap involving those clubs? Plus, we're taking a look at some players that are likely going to become available for the Utah Hockey Club unless they can really have a strong return after the break and get back into the wildcard race. Plus, what's the latest on Dylan Cozens? Could he be linked to another Atlantic Division team? Plus, we have comments from former NHL superstar Pavel Bure, kind of ripping the Vancouver Canucks in their handling of the Pettersson-Miller situation. Plus, of course, the Four Nation tournament continues. We had a stunning game earlier today with Finland upsetting Sweden, and we're getting ready for the battle of the decades, what I'm calling it, between Canada and USA. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about today. Let's kick things off again with some more updates on the Four Nation Face-Off Tournament. We saw a pretty big game earlier today between two really long-time rivals in Sweden and Finland. And Finland, I think it's fair to say, upset Sweden 4-3 in overtime. It started off good for Sweden with Mika Zibanejad opening the scoring. The Finns responded fairly quickly. Within 2 minutes later, Anton Lundell ties the game. And then right at the end of the first period, we saw Mikko Rantanen score a power play goal to give them a 2-1 lead going into the second. A little bit of a surprise coming out for the second. It's not Philip Gustafsson going into the net for Sweden. It's Linus Ullmark. Gustafsson was pulled. Now, as much as you could probably make an argument that it was performance-related, the head coach insisted it wasn't, that he was actually battling an illness and that he was unable to continue. Either way, regardless of the reasoning, Ullmark comes in, did fairly well. Obviously, that gave the Swedes a little bit of a shot of energy. They came out strong in the second period, scored a couple of goals early in the period to give themselves a 3-2 lead. Again, though, late in the period, the Finns come back with a late period goal from this time from Barkov to tie things up. And then it goes into the third period, no additional goals. We end up overtime, and it only took 1:49 for the Finns and Mikael Granlund to score on a 2-on-1, beat Linus Ullmark. Game over, Finland wins. Obviously, that is a massive loss for the Swedes that now have 2 games played and 2 overtime losses. That only gives them 2 points with their last game coming up against USA, which is certainly going to be a really tough matchup. Even if they pulled off a big win, they're still going to be sitting there at most with 5 points, which is probably not going to be enough to get into the championship game. Obviously, if they lost to Canada, they lost to Finland, beating the U.S. is going to be a monumental task. For the Finns, it kind of gives them a little bit of life in the tournament, but again, this probably helped Canada more than anybody else, to be completely honest. If Canada now defeats Finland in regulation, and they would be the heavy favorites going into that. Now, I know Canada plays U.S. tonight, but regardless of the outcome of that game, if Canada plays or will play and defeats Finland in regulation on Monday, they will be in the championship game. So Canada, not that they want to lose to the U.S., they want to probably beat them more than anything, considering they're their biggest rivals. But even if they lose to the U.S. but beat Finland, at that point, they would be in. If Canada and Sweden or Finland are at this point, well, Canada and Sweden, if they have any kind of a tie in the standings, Canada wins the tiebreaker because the first one is head-to-head matchup. So, so looking good for Canada. That game being won by the Finns and in overtime helped Canada out, but Canada still has to take care of their own business. Now, of course, like I said, big game tonight. Arguably the biggest international hockey game on the men's side of the puck in the last decade, considering we haven't had true best-on-best here up until now, with these nations at least. I know it doesn't feel the same because it's not the Olympics. It's only 4 nations, but either way, regardless of who else is involved in this, having a game of Canada versus the U.S. is still huge for all of these players that are involved. It's going to be a bit of a different looking lineup for Canada tonight. Sam Bennett goes in, Travis Konecny comes out. That's a coach's decision. I think it's been planned all along that Bennett would play against the U.S. They need his gritty style against a heavier U.S. team. And bad news for Canada that we just learned moments ago, before I started to record this at least, be a little bit before this makes it to YouTube, so it'll be old news then, but Cale Makar is out tonight. He was going to be a game time decision, battling an illness. He did practice earlier, but they determined that he is too sick to play, unable to go. So Thomas Harley, who did make it to Montreal, the Dallas Stars defenseman, is in tonight. A lot of people thought maybe there's a chance he'd play in Boston against the Finns, but we've had unexpected circumstances here yet again. Another big piece of the Canadian blue line. And Makar was a game high, 28 minutes against the Swedes. Of course, that included over 6 minutes and change of overtime, but still, a lot more minutes for Canada than anybody else. That is a massive loss. Of course, the U.S. are already without Quinn Hughes, who did not start the tournament at all. So I guess from that sense, maybe things are, from an offensive dynamic standpoint, a little bit more evened up here, but still, it's going to be a massive game. I expect the Canucks to be a handful for the States. For the Canadians, of course, you get Crosby, McKinnon, McDavid, Stone, Marchand, all going to have to be huge tonight. We'll see how Harley comes in and how he plays early on. He's a really good defenseman, but he's not been allowed to practice with the team or do anything. So, how easily is he going to kind of just jump in and go? Hard to say, right? They're expecting a massive crowd, lots of, star power in the crowd as well as on the ice. It's expected, not that it really matters too much, but I know Carey Price is expected to be there, as well as Georges St. Pierre as well. So some big Montreal legends in their own right, as well as lots of other celebrity or high-ranking political people are supposed to be in the building. So we'll see where things go. It should be a massive game. Like I said, by the time this hits YouTube, the game is going to be well underway. And I know a lot of you probably won't get the chance to watch this probably till after, because I know all eyes are going to be on Canada, U.S. I suspect the YouTube stats are going to probably be down for a couple of hours tonight, as a big chunk of Canada and the U.S. have their eyes peeled on this four-nation face-off game. The ratings have been really good so far, so obviously that's very positive going into this. Now on to some other news around the league. Pavel Bure, longtime NHL forward, was a superstar in his day, has recently completed an interview with RG.com, and he certainly goes about kind of ripping the Canucks for their handling of the Pettersson Miller situation. Also had some comments on the four-nation face-off tournament, which I don't disagree with. He said it's not complete without Russia, was one of the quotes taken from that article. And I agree. It's unfortunate that we can't have more than four nations competing in this tournament. It's nice to hear that, in 2028, they're trying to do a World Cup with at least 8 teams. Obviously, there's still some level of doubt that the Russians are going to be able to compete in the 2026 Olympics. That's not even a sure thing. If I'm not mistaken, the IHF has already announced for the 25-26 season that they're not going to be participating. So, I know in some other circumstances they've let athletes participate, but not as their country. I don't know if there's any way they can do that or what. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world, a lot of things that different than hockey, making these decisions. And I just wanted to see the world have enough peace that we can have everybody compete here and not have to worry about all of this stuff. I'd really like to see a true best on best tournament. This is a great tournament. It's been a lot of fun, I will say. The hockey's been excellent, but there's lots of room for it to be better, with lots of other countries and star players and star powerhouse countries like the Russians to be involved and to get back to what we used to have, before the NHL got in its own way and kind of, took away the NHL players from being involved in the tournament. Pavel Bure also went on to say, when it comes to the Canucks and their handling of Miller and Pettersson, he certainly blames management for how it all went down. He says, if you've got a star or talented player who doesn't fit in with the team, that's a failure of management. And he's not wrong. And if it gets to the point where you have to trade him, then something's already gone wrong. And again, I agree with Bure's statements here. Essentially, I know there wasn't long ago, it was Miller or Horvat. And now we're talking Miller or Pettersson. A little bit of a different scenario, but did they make the wrong choice? Now it's looking like maybe they did. Now, after what Miller put up for production last year, I think a lot of people had the opinion that obviously Miller had better offensive numbers than Horvat last year. They made the right choice. But now here we are just one season later, and they're forced to trade him. And the return was okay, but it wasn't phenomenal because of the situation and predicament they found themselves in. So should they have maybe traded Miller 2 years ago and re-signed Horvat. I mean, I know Horvat was having a career season. He was probably looking for too much money, but, do you keep him and try to, show some faith, move Miller, try to get that number down on Horvat a little bit? I don't know. Anyways, I mean, I know it's worked out relatively okay for the New York Islanders. Horvat's been a good player there, but, I don't disagree with Bure's comments. The management screwed this up. I think they could have made a different decision a couple of years ago. Because here's the thing: this whole Pettersson-Miller thing, not new. It's been going on for a few years. So they knew what was going on then, and they still signed him, and then signed Pettersson, and of course Horvat gets traded. Like, a lot of decisions could have been made differently to avoid all this. Because look, Miller's been gone now for a few weeks, and Pettersson is still not right. Even looking at watching him play in this Four Nation tournament, and it's like you're really starting to wonder where Elias Pettersson went. He's not himself. Like that 100-point player that we saw a while back, he doesn't seem to be there anymore. And I'm not sure if it's just a mental thing, or I can't imagine the skills don't just evaporate overnight. It's hard to imagine, but if this player doesn't get back to being anything close to what he was when he signed his contract, you may not be able to trade him. And even if you do, like, you could have Horvat, Miller, and Pettersson all gone within a couple of years for a team that last year was not far off from winning the second round of the playoffs. Like, that's an epic failure in that sense. So we'll have to see what happens here. But Bure's comments are certainly very interesting, to say the least, and certainly something that I just wanted to talk about, considering his with his experience being in the league, in that market, with that team and everything. I'm sure this is not the first time, like I said, that something like this has come up, but certainly the way management's handled it has played a big role in how it's played out. And I think fair to say that things could have been done better. Now, on the trade front, I do want to take a look at a couple of quick things here. Utah is a team, according to NHL insiders, that are probably going to be making a few players available here after the Four Nation break. And, of course, they'll probably take a couple of games coming back to see what happens. They're 6 points out of a playoff spot, chasing Vancouver, Calgary down. And, they might want to give themselves a little bit of time before they officially wave the flag and call themselves sellers. But a number of players there, including the goaltender from Elka. You've got Nick Bukestad, obviously a depth centerman. You got Ian Cole in the back end, lots of experience, Stanley Cup pedigree. And then even Alex Kerfoot is another name that's been out there that's drawing some interest. I know Bukestad's a name that's been linked to the Oilers. We mentioned Michael McCarron in the last day or two as well, being another name. Obviously, with the Evander Kane situation, we don't know how long Kane's going to be out, and he may not be out the rest of the season, and they might be very limited to what they can do at the deadline. So adding a depth forward that's not making a ton of money like a Bukestad or a McCarron might be all they're able to do. So we'll have to see where that goes, but Bukestad's drawing interest from Edmonton. Ian Cole, Florida, Tampa, a few others definitely reportedly have some interest. There's some degree of interest reportedly from the Avalanche, and maybe having a reunion with Alex Kerfoot, of course, who started his career there before being traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs in the Kadri deal. So certainly a bunch of names that are out there. Vejmelka is another name, like I said. I'm not really sure where he could end up. I've seen some suggesting maybe the Penguins, but I think that would be more for future, because Penguins are not going to the playoffs. That looks pretty obvious here right now. So we'll see what happens. But Utah had high aspirations this year, and I do expect them to be big players in the offseason. There are some that think that if Mikko Rantanen makes it to free agency, that Utah is going to go after him, or Mitch Marner. If any of those big names, if they make it to free agency and they can at least have conversations, that they're going to pitch them hardcore and try to be willing to spend, even if it means offering them a ridiculous amount of money on a 1-year deal or something short term to get them to come with the promise of another 7-8 year deal to follow. That is something that we might see, because we know ownership there wants to make a big splash. So keep your eyes on Rantanen here. I don't know that they would make a big trade for him if the Hurricanes decide to flip him here, because there is some wondering if that's going to happen. But I think in free agency, if he's not signed, same with Marner or any of the other bigger names that are out there, look for Utah to make a big splash. Dylan Cozens, of course, is a player that we've heard lots about here in the last number of weeks as well. The latest team linked to the Sabres are Atlantic Division rival Detroit Red Wings. Now, unfortunately, right now, they're not a big rivalry. Buffalo finds themselves again in the basement, whereas Ottawa and Detroit are holding down wildcard spots as we get through this four-nation break. Cozens would be a big upgrade in some degree for the Detroit Red Wings. Now, there's been different teams that have been linked to Cozens off and on here in the last number of weeks. Detroit is a newer team that's been linked to him. The Red Wings are a tough team to get information out of. Steve Yzerman is like Lou Lamoriello, keeps everything very, very secretive. The fact that the Red Wings are interested in him, I think, was most likely, if anything, probably get out through the Sabres side of it. I'm not sure. But Cozens himself, with the Red Wings, according to Red Wing beat writer Answer Khan, he says a couple of names that you would not see the Red Wings be willing to move in a trade of that nature would include Marco Kasper and Simon Edvinsson. So if the Red Wings make a package or try to make a push to get a player like him, they're not going to want to include those guys. So the problem here is, who would you offer? You're obviously, your top core guys are not going to be on the table here. You're not going to want to move Larkin or Raymond, that's for sure, or Kane or DeBrincat. I mean, Kane has protection anyway. So who does that leave you? I mean, are they going to take Kopp or Comfer or one of these contracts that you may not love right now? You're not going to move Mo Seider. Like, that's not something you want to do. And Buffalo, he would be an upgrade on the Buffalo blue line, but that's probably not what Buffalo's looking for anyway. Like, it's an interesting concept for Detroit, but it's going to be tough. What are you going to offer, like a first rounder and Nate Danielson or something? I'm not sure that gets it done. Cozens is going to be demanding a big package. Even though his numbers are down, the Sabres aren't moving him without being, really given a package that's going to make them better long term, and that's going to be very challenging to do for Detroit. Like I said before, there's a number of teams out there that have been linked to Cozens. I don't know that Buffalo pulls the trigger. I know they do need to retool. They obviously, what they have is not working, but I think the more likely trade candidate out of Buffalo is probably Bo Byram. But again, we'll see what happens there in Buffalo. Now, we mentioned with the Islanders, Noah Dobson's name. We know he changed agencies. He needs a new contract after the year. And there's a lot of talk about whether or not he would be available. Elliot Friedman did a lot of digging on Dobson, and on one of his latest podcasts mentioned that Dobson's not being actively shopped, but he was put on the table in a trade package with a team that involved a significant player coming back, which many are believing to be Vancouver and Elias Pettersson. At this point, though, the Canucks, I think, want to hold off on a Pettersson trade. I think if you talk to them with a package that wows them, they're going to listen, but they're not actively looking for it right now. I think they'll pursue that again maybe in the offseason if things don't get better. That's my take on Pettersson. But we know that the Islanders are willing to entertain Dobson in big situations. And I wonder about a player like Jordan Kyrou in St. Louis. The Blues are a team that reportedly has a number of balls in the air, guys they're willing to consider, guys they don't have to move, but between trade protection kicking in and trying to retool the team, they have some big decisions to make. Like I said, you're looking at whether it be, there's some talk about Braden Shen, who we've talked about here a couple of times recently. They can make further changes to their blue line. Would a guy like Kyrou be available? Buchnevich, his name has been come up. One of these guys with contract term is probably going to get moved. I mean, it's believed that Doug Armstrong and the Blues want a little bit more flexibility when it comes to their contracts and their cap, and that one of the forwards that have term is probably going to go in some sort of contract. Now, like, the Blues were a team that were reportedly, even though they've got lots of D and they've made lots of moves already in the D category, that a guy like Dobson would intrigue them, and that if they could make a swap, that it would be something that they would want to consider. So, Kyrou for Dobson, it may not even be 1-for-1, but it could be the beginning of a package that might make sense for both sides. If I'm the New York Islanders, though, I'm not moving Dobson for just anybody. Like, I'm getting a top-notch player, and I know Kyrou has that potential, but is he high-end enough to consider parting with Dobson? He's a right-shot defenseman with size that you drafted that has potential to be a point-per-game player from the back end. It's risky, tough trade to win. I just don't know. But, I mean, if they're willing to do it for Pettersson, who, one point in his career, not too far back, was a 100-point player, I get that. But I've seen a lot of chatter about Dobson for Kyrou. I don't know that Kyrou high enough end for that to be a one-for-one deal. I think it would have to be more than Kyrou in the package. And then, things get complicated with the cap as well. But could those two teams be linked to each other? It makes sense to at least have some conversations, but be interesting to see as we come out of the Four Nation break and get closer to the NHL trade deadline. So let me know your thoughts. Looking forward to Team Canada versus USA. As I finish recording here, puck drop's just a few moments away, so this video will likely get up probably during the intermission. We'll see. Let me know what your thoughts on the game, as well as everything discussed here in the video in the comment section, and we'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.